Are wars actually perversely just good for the stock market and the economy?
Sensex has begun the day trading above 81,000.
The Indian market recording its best day in 4 years. The Sensex and the Nifty up 4%, each ending at 7-month highs.
The Sensex is up by 1,800 points and Nifty by 540 points. In absolute terms, this is the biggest gain in one day.
When the wars get over, you actually suddenly get this massive impulse, and that impulse causes economies to expand. That impulse usually comes from government spending. We didn't send satellites to space so that Swiggy could deliver you something in 10 minutes.
If CapEx has such a high return and can change the country so dramatically, then why don't we manufacture in India anyway? We've tried in the past and it often hasn't gone very well.
One of the things that makes me very bullish about India is this move from being a trader to a manufacturer. I think if we make for India, the scale of the opportunity is absolutely massive.
Deepak, we've seen war or war-like situations in many parts of the world for the last couple of years now. And I remember vividly that when the Russia-Ukraine conflict started, I was convinced as a layman that Russian economy was going to collapse. And in fact, I was like, the visual that I remember, and I hope it wasn't a fake image, was people queuing up in the Moscow subway station because their Apple Pay had stopped working. And so now they had no way of using digital entry and exit. And I thought these guys were going to collapse. It's been a couple of years now, and now my YouTube and podcast feeds are why the Russian economy is doing well because of the conflict, and I'm more confused than ever. Israel-Gaza was very asymmetric, so maybe there's not too much to discuss there, but Israel seems to be doing okay as an economy still. And that brief India-Pakistan tension that has just concluded seems to actually have given India an impetus to do more manufacturing, bring more defense production onto our shores, and the economy is doing reasonably well. The stock market is also doing fairly well. So this is a bit perplexing because I think the question I'd like to ask you is, are wars actually perversely just good for the stock market and the economy? Or limited wars good for the stock market and the economy?
You know, Shrey, I think more important than anything else, wars have been both a massive cultural and an economic impulse to countries worldwide. So you have economies affected by it, you have cultures. India's, two famous books, Ramayana and Mahabharata, are about wars. So in the sense of they shaped culture, they shaped relationships, they also shaped a lot of economic activity. And the economic activity, you can look at it in different terms, and maybe we'll talk about this in more detail. But why is it in a way good or bad in that sense? Now, if you're in war, like for instance, right now, I think Ukraine is in bad shape because they export wheat, they can't export wheat because they're in a war and it's difficult to get ships out and all that stuff. Asymmetrically, Gaza is in horrible shape. In India, Pakistan, it was a very limited war. So I'll come to why that also is very interesting. But essentially, when you're during a war, things don't look great. Even during the India-Pakistan war, although India had no problems having flights, we both flew from Europe to India at that time, and there was no problem at all. But there were no flights flying into Pakistan because it kind of blocked out the entire airspace. So during the war, there is a problem in terms of economy. You're sitting in a situation where things aren't as good and all that stuff. But when the wars get over or get done with, you actually suddenly get this massive impulse, and that impulse causes economies to expand simply because of that impulse. That impulse usually comes from government spending, but in general, a larger appreciation at home from saying, oh, we've got to replenish our weapons, we've got to add more of our fortifications in place and all that stuff. All of these things kind of add to the real game. And whatever damage you've done, whatever damage has been done to you has to be undone and recovered. Also, if you fight a war that is either limited, so you've not had too much damage either ways, but you still feel the need for recovery, or you're fighting like America did with Iraq, a war really far away where you're not getting attacked to your home shore. So you're not seeing too much damage on yourself, but you're actually, your war defense companies are actually fighting to replenish all the resources that are being fought in the war. That both of these things have economic impulses that are positive in nature. In the sense they force production, they push people to move things more. All of this is fine. These are direct impacts of a war. But I think the greater thing that happens in a war, and this is because we've seen wars come all the way from then to now, is that you change the definition of how investments are made. A war forces a country to say, I do not have to justify the return on investment on certain expenditure that I have to do, which I otherwise in peace times might have to do. Let me give you this example from in different ways. Okay, so in peace, I'll look at just peacetime stuff and then we'll go to the war stuff. So in peacetime, you had rare earth metals. Rare earth metals are abundant, not abundant, but they are available all over the world. But China seems to have the largest concentration of them. Why? Of course, there may be some geographical thing as well, but also because in most other places, extracting these rare earth metals out of the ground is uneconomical. India found large amounts of lithium resources somewhere in Jammu. They were not able to extract it out because the cost of getting to that lithium is greater than the cost of how much that lithium will sell for. So therefore, there's no economic return on that investment, right? But what if I told you that India decided that lithium is important to us, and we went in and said, let's forget what the investment costs, let's just go get that lithium. Then incremental cost to get that lithium once I get there is probably very small because I've already done all the hard work of digging in to get there. And then it may cost me only $1 or 1 rupee to get a lithium out, and I know it markets for like 5 rupees for the same amount of lithium. So I'm still profitable on an ongoing basis. It's just that the initial investment can never be recovered. China did this for all its rare earth metals, where it spent a lot of money saying we don't know what these are going to be used for. They're called antimony and gallium and something else. And these things basically have been discovered and taken out of the earth. Now, gallium is also used, is available in Canada, from Canada. Maybe quantities will be slightly different. There's parts of the aluminium smelting process that can bring in more rare earth metals. It's just costly because it's in the process of making the aluminium that you get out this gallium, I forget the name of the compound. But China makes all of this stuff. Now, why does it make all of this? Why does it have this extreme? So it just says, well, I don't know what it's going to be used for. But if tomorrow we discover it is useful in aerospace or in engines or in aircrafts or in missiles, then guess what? I have enough of it. For them, that is more important than saying, listen, we need it and we should find the next country to import it from. Because the minute you start importing stuff that is important to you, you become dependent on that import. And they have decided that's more important for them not to be dependent on that import than everything else.
You sound a bit like Trump, but okay.
Well, I know. And nowadays, anyone who seems to, say in defense of our non-importing from outside. But yeah, it's a very interesting point of view here, because while China is not at war with anybody, meaningfully at least, they have decided that they're going to behave as if they are, and they are going to try and reduce the impact of anything. And they're a communist country; they can do whatever they want. They do want to export. They do export a lot of stuff. So they have a lot of surplus dollars, if you may. But they've used a lot of this money, this expenditure that they've done, to primarily ensure a constant supply of something that was so hard to reach in the first place that other countries would do it if they had the impetus to do it. But most other countries at peacetime have no economic impetus to do the same thing. The same thing I would say, that's the government, right? But in the US, there was fracking. It's like there's oil. A lot of oil exists in Saudi Arabia, Norway, maybe parts of the northern Saharan desert in Libya and such. But you actually have a very significant portion of oil, or a very significant portion of reserves of oil, crude oil and gas, under shelves of rock. So you want to get to those shelves, you have to frack or fracture the rock, which is why it's called fracking. You fracture the rock not by drilling it vertically, it may have a lot of resistance. You want to drill it horizontally as well. So when you want to drill horizontally, it takes a lot of effort, chemicals, equipment to do this. That chemical effort costs a lot of money. So when the first set of frackers went in, they said, well, you know what? The oil price is more than $100 a barrel and we need $100 a barrel for us to break even. I went in and they did all this stuff, and then oil, because they discovered it, they added to the supply. The demand of crude is more or less constant. When you add to supply and demand is constant, prices fall. So it fell below $100. Now, many of these companies said, listen, we can't survive. We issued a lot of bonds to finance our whole thing. We issued bonds very expensive. They're supposed to pay us 10, 15% a year in terms of interest. Now they can't meet those payments, so they go default. Now what happens when you go default is the bondholders now own the company. The bondholders say, well, you can sell the company, it still fracks and gets oil. So can we get a buyer for this? Somebody comes in and says, you know what, your break even was $100 because you invested $100, you borrowed $100 and all that. Why don't I buy it from you for $80 instead of $100? So the bondholders are thinking like this and saying, well, you know what, we ran this company for 2 years. We saw this company run for 2 years. They paid us 15% a year. So I got $15 and then I got another $15. Now the third year, they're not able to pay me that $15, which is why they're bankrupt. So actually on 30 out of it. If he pays me 80, I got that 80 plus the 30, 110. So I invested 100, I got 110. It's like a 5% return, but it's better than a 0% return or losing money in that sense, so might as well sell it. So they sell it. Now, the guy who buys it also then issues bonds for it and says, I don't have 80, I'm going to borrow most of that money. I am going to then finance it. Maybe he finances it at 14% or 15%. He says, my break-even price is $80. Now, oil is at 95, he's able to make profits for the first 1 or 2 years, and then it comes down to 80, and then he says, oh, well, I am also bankrupt. Somebody else buys it at 70. So who's financed the fall? So the break-even price has kept falling. Today, it's about $42 or something like that. So the fracking companies are profitable above 42 because these series of bankruptcies, which took maybe 5 or 7 years to pass through, the series of bankruptcies is exactly what has led to the price of or the break-even price of oil falling to the 40s. Even though oil is at $60 today, these companies are okay and profitable, and they're still breaking and getting fracking and getting oil out. In the middle, the Biden had kind of hurt their progress by saying, I won't allow you to get to frack oil because of environmental concerns. I won't allow a pipeline to be built. Now those pipelines are getting built, and so there'll be more fracking, and so more supply, which means I think over and above this, so somebody has financed an expensive project because it doesn't cost so much to go and get the oil out now. It just costs a lot to get there in the first place. This initial investment that was being done was financed primarily by people at least in the fracking world, to have gotten the break-even price down from $100 to $40, and most of the hit in the middle has been taken by the bond market. So you're almost thinking like, that massive initial investment, these people have actually gone in and invested all this money without thinking of the economic return on that investment because it's so related to the market price.
I think I have to step in. The question I want to ask is, look, the Chinese government, people famously say they think in centuries and not couple of years and all. So they are like a force unlike any other. And maybe some oil frackers just got lucky or unlucky depending on how you think of it. But in general, who are these actors who are going to be so generous or foolish or just non-economic enough that they will make an investment without really thinking about what the profitability or the payoff on that is? There is like an opportunity cost for capital, right?
Yeah, you know what? You're right. It's like three different kinds of people, and I'll explain how, who seem to be stupid enough to do this. But I don't think it's the operating word is stupid, because somehow it comes back later to say, well, that sounded really smart. So, for instance, China has all the rare earths today, but it doesn't really have all the rare earths. It's just one of the first countries to mine for them meaningfully. So they have all the rare earths. They're very valuable in the solar world, in the battery world and all that stuff. But it's because they made the initial investment to go in and get them in the first place. Countries, therefore. And when we're discussing war, we'll talk about why we're discussing this war thing, because now countries can spend a lot more without needing to justify the ROI on that investment, simply because it's around defense. But the point is that that's the number one actor that can do this. Now, who else can do it? One is the bond market, like we talked about in fracking, or you can think of the whole venture capital investment criteria, right? So you got the bond market in India has, for instance, become a different world in terms of trying to finance all of this. So perhaps one way to think about this could have been telecom. Telecom requires a large amount of initial investment, and it eventually comes out as 100 rupees per month for using my service. So it's a very low cost effective service. So for me to serve an incremental customer today costs very little. But unfortunately, it takes a lot of investment to get there in the first place. I have to cover pan India, I have to get licenses, I have to get equipment and so on. This has also come on the back of the fact that while we have connected India, how did India connect to the world? There was there is a cable called CME-V3, which is Southeast Asia, Middle East, and V is Western Europe. So I think the idea is a cable that runs under the sea that connects India to the Middle East and then Middle East all the way to Western Europe and Netherlands and all that stuff through the Mediterranean. Now, somebody has to finance this cable. And in the 1990s, it was apparent that, internet's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, but it seems to be a Western phenomenon. There's nothing in India meaningful, and we have to do satellite dial-up lines and all that stuff. So the question is, if you had to have satellite dial-up lines, isn't that okay? The satellites are thousands of miles above. So to send a signal would require you to send a signal to the satellite and then it come back to Earth, and then the response goes all the way back and comes back. Even at the speed of light, it's in the order of seconds just to send a request and get a response. Nowadays it's in nanoseconds or milliseconds. Okay, so it's not even comparable. Now, if you want nanoseconds or milliseconds, you cannot use satellites. You have to use cables that are under the ground or connected across the ground, because then you can do optical fiber, speed of light, much faster stuff. This was not something that this is something that people knew, but it cost a lot of money to lay these cables. So there were two things. One was called FLAG, which was India connecting to Singapore, and one was the CME-V3 thing. But the players that actually initially laid these cables had probably high expectations of India in the first place. India did not have the penetration. So many of them just went bankrupt during this process. So VSNL, not B, but V, Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited. So VSNL, which is now Tata Communications, went in and bought a stake in one of them, got themselves this undersea cable, this thing, through perhaps what was a bankruptcy of somebody else. FLAG was a project created to connect India, among other countries, to Singapore and a few other places. Reliance Communications bought that company. Again, that went bankrupt, and that's why. So this bankrupt thing, and the bond market and effectively the liquidation process is one way for companies to acquire something else that is costly to make at a much cheaper price, simply because those equity investors are willing to take a hit. It's the same with whether it is the VC world, which is at some level spending a lot of money. Today also, I think Uber is still unprofitable in India, or Ola is unprofitable meaningfully, and I'm not talking about the energy company which is listed, but the cab company is not meaningfully profitable. So at some point, somebody has had to build all these services, contact all these cabs, get them to participate, lose money in the process, and eventually, change the attitude of people saying, listen, I'm not going to go outside and wait for a cab that I can hail, which is how people in New York used to do things, and people in Bombay used to do things for the most part. Now everybody just orders an Uber, and so it's much easier for you to change behavior in that sense, right? So I think these behavior to change this, you had to actually go in and invest a lot of money. That was the second. So you have this VC or a bond market layer which kind of finances this as a dream. The third one is eventually a taxpayer, because in India they did this with steel companies. Steel is another one of those things where you need to spend a lot of money, but then incrementally buying iron ore to convert to steel is not so expensive. So it's the plant that costs a lot of money. So, but a lot of steel companies in India invested a lot of money building steel plants. And of course, there was a bunch of other problematic elements, like India didn't have a bankruptcy law and all that stuff. But India got itself a bankruptcy act. And in the process, what would happen is these steel companies would take these loans and they would go bankrupt, in the sense of saying, I can't pay back the loans. So the banks would write them down earlier, before the Bankruptcy Act. And then the banks would take the losses. Now these banks are public sector banks, so it's the taxpayers that take the loss. In America in 2008, it was the taxpayers that took the hit that would eventually finance what was left of Citibank and let it go. AIG, let it go. And even the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which were big, large companies, except they were not supposed to be backstopped by the central government, and they are now they have been backstopped. So effectively, the taxpayer paid for them. They didn't have to pay major amounts of money. But what happens is, when these players take a hit, it's the taxpayers' money that goes to actually replenish their capital, and that is when it becomes profitable again. Now, all of this is great, but why the war, and why do we have anything like a war in this, in this conversation? This sounds like peacetime stuff. Let me say this: we didn't send satellites to space so that Swiggy could deliver you something in 10 minutes. The fact that you're getting GPS signal that allows you to track a rider in real time on the ground in Bangalore comes because there is a satellite connection that is allowing constant pings that basically shows you how a rider is moving in this thing, but not real time, but like slightly delayed. But it's coming from a satellite that somebody sent into space. It was not to help riders deliver things in 10 minutes. It was because we wanted to know where our enemy is and what their movements are. So we wanted to know whether enemy installations, there were guns, there were tanks, there were movement of troops. That is why we sent satellites to space. That was a defense expenditure. Do you think the defense guys would have said, listen, we're sending this to space, maybe tomorrow there'll be this 10-minute delivery guy who can also use it? Answer is no. They didn't even, this was not even part of their radar. It was more like, dude, I need to know what my enemy is doing. I don't care what it costs. Let's figure it out and spend it, right? So they didn't think of this return on investment of, oh, Swiggy will happen in the long term. Therefore, we should also do this. And I think that such investments are made as a result of a war. Simply because, dude, we need to protect ourselves, and whatever it takes, we will do this. Now, there are downstream positives also. So if you look at this from a perspective of, oh, I invested all this money and I got this. Like, for instance, India has a space research program. We didn't get any help from any other country because we turned nuclear. So they're like, if you build rockets that go to space, you can build missiles that go to other countries and deliver nuclear payloads. So we're like, yes, but we also have a space research program. So when we decided to do all of this, we had to do a lot of this stuff in-house. And therefore, we needed to share we couldn't get a lot of research from other places. So we built a lot of materials. Apparently, and Abdul Kalam, ex-president and person who was heading the part of the space program, was very interesting story that he said was that he was in when they develop rockets, they use materials that are both good and strong and also light. So they have to go to space, they have to come back, they have to beat the this thing energy and not burn up during re-entry and all that. So what Abdul Kalam said was, he went to Jaipur and he found people making artificial feet for people who had lost limbs. And the artificial feet were made of wood. They were very heavy. So one of the questions that he asked people who were using these artificial feet was, how you feel? They said, it's all very nice, it helps us walk, but it's very heavy. Towards the end of the day, I'm very tired. I have to massage my legs just to because it's so heavy for me to carry it around. And he's like, why is it heavy? Because it's made of wood. And he's like, but we at ISRO have better material to do this. So they're like, oh, but we're not ISRO. And he's like, oh, wait, if you're not ISRO, we can make this foot for you. So he actually helped them make a more, better foot in that sense. So you see a lot of people, even Olympic athletes, they don't travel with full legs. I mean, they don't run with the full legs. It's actually a metal piece that actually has the, capability of running and all that. So that helping them run and all that. But that point that he said was, we did all this research for a completely different purpose, to send stuff to space, but it's actually useful in the real world as well. So this real world equivalence is what happens when you get that CapEx. So nobody asked him, if I send a satellite to space, what is my economic return? How much money are you going to make for me? It was more a massive mention of pride, a mention of countries, this thing, and plus, of course, our defense research capabilities, which was being enhanced by something like ISRO. But in the process, we got a better Jaipur foot. So that in the process bit is what I think people have talked about as defense driving a lot of investments that have big returns in the future. One of the reasons why the internet exists, and perhaps you're watching this on, say, a YouTube or something like that, is because the internet started out as a defense project called ARPA or ARPANET, and that was a way to communicate between different computers that were linked to different geographical areas without having to have a point one-to-one connection. And because of that, I think we've got massive scale, and the American defense research is almost like a legendary thing in the internet world, because there were so many things that were invented, from cryptography to which is now responsible for Bitcoin.
They may want to like pretend that didn't happen.
Yeah, possibly pretend that didn't happen, or some of the other advancements. Now, much of it has come to the educational sphere, but was driven by the defense needs, and to the extent that today drone development is also driven by defense needs.
Okay, but to some extent, my reaction is, isn't there a bit of cherry picking going on? I mean, you've highlighted the CapEx that worked out, or the innovations that found other uses. But surely just being able to do CapEx without justification, this is not a recipe for success in general, right? I mean, the fact that you can pull it off every now and then also surely cannot just be a recipe for success. Like, if you just build a bridge to nowhere, wasn't that just a waste of resources and something you should have not done in the first place? And just because one day, 100 years later, there may be a city there, your bridge may not last that long. So what do you have to say to that? Do you feel that there is a reason why we have costs of capital, opportunity costs, and being able to temporarily do away with justifications may work out, but it's surely not some recipe for success?
You're right, because sometimes these become memes as well. I remember there was this place in the Honduras called Choluteca or Coluteca or something like that, where they built a bridge across a river, and then the river shifted course. So there was a bridge, but there was no river, and the river was somewhere else. And they were showing you this bridge in the middle of nowhere, and they were saying, oh, you have to plan. There were these LinkedIn posts, which were, I mean, it's a little bit cringe, but of this, oh, you should build a bridge, and you should know exactly what you need, you're building it on, and plan in the past. You don't know what the future will hold, and so on. But guess what? I said, you know what, this is great. This is a LinkedIn post of some 2014 or something. What now? So go there to look at that exact space on the web. There is a bridge, there's a full road and a highway. It connects to massive places, and they're very popular, and it has changed people's lives. The bridge to nowhere, when it was to nowhere, did not help. But a little bit further downstream, they were able to connect it and make massive use of it. And now, if you can see the drive, that bridge is just one part of a very interesting journey across this entire place. This, I think, is one of the consequences of wasteful CapEx, if you may, in the sense of it sounds like it's wasteful. So China does this all the time, right? They when they want to fuel their economy, they just break down current bridges and then rebuild them again. Not the fancy ones, but the smaller ones. You might think, what are they doing? I mean, just breaking out a bridge and build it again. But it's interesting because when you do this, you create employment in that scene. So it's possible that there are downstream consequences to it. But of course, breaking down a bridge and building it again has very little, But sometimes when you build a bridge to nowhere, it sounds like a bridge that is unused or relatively less used. And a few years down the line, suddenly you find out, oh, it's such a boon that this bridge exists. I remember in Bangalore when the first large flyover came on Mysore Road. There were articles 2 weeks later saying no one's using the bridge, because the bridge went from the beginning of the busy part of town, which is say town hall, it went above all the market areas, KR market and stuff, and ended down at Mysore Road, almost at the, not Mysore, about near Mysore Road at the very end. It was great for people coming in from Mysore, people going to Mysore from the center of the city, but people who actually wanted to go to the market were going below. So there were not that many people traveling outside. But now, this is a lifesaver, because you still can't go to the market areas where it's so crowded. And if it was the only way to go, you would just not travel that distance. And that bridge has changed people's lives. Not forget now, even 1 month after that happened. And that got me thinking, because I'm saying, do we really need infrastructure to be built so that it can be fully utilized within the first month after it's built? Or can we just not build for the fact that tomorrow at some point this will become even more useful than it is? It's infrastructure. So you build it and keep it, and don't worry about its economic return, primarily say. So this is incredible that you could actually do this in different ways. But let's say in a war, things look bleak, right? And you've had bombings and this and that and all that stuff. Now you want to rebuild what's there. To give you just an example of, say, Ukraine, I'm sure there are lots of buildings bombed and they need to be rebuilt. So there's that. You'll rebuild something to exactly house what was there earlier. But let's say the India-Pakistan war, you've had the defense people say, well, you know what, they use these kind of missiles. So, and they destroyed, say, this bunker, and I'm going to rebuild that bunker. But when they do that, they're almost going to be like, listen, tomorrow if they use those missiles again, I have other bunkers. I need to fortify them, I need to do something else. They might be thinking, listen, India sent some really low-range missiles. So we also need to send some low-range missiles, something that goes along the ground. Now, you can't build along the ground radar, because radar will then just keep beeping all the time for anything, including birds that fly in the sky. So radar needs a certain, so radar just, it acts on this, it sends a signal and whatever comes back, wala thing. But what if you change it to visual? So you said, I will use a camera and try to detect if there's incoming missiles of some type or some magnitude. And only then do I kind of activate my anti-aircraft kind of systems. Now, it is more difficult to fly low and beat a visual recognition system than it is to fly high. So for high, I have radar, for low, I have visual. So you say that India starts building out these things. What does it do? It doesn't go and call China up and says, send me this stuff. I mean, it in the past it used to. This is exactly how it used to behave. Is call up, any other country and say, please send me these weapons, and they would send you these weapons, and then suddenly during war, I'm sorry, but you have to use a key to unlock these systems, and we're not going to give it to you. So now we're like, no keys, we'll make it. So it's ours. So what happens now is you don't not only build back what is broken, you fortify what is left. So you end up without having to need to justify the CapEx in this fortification mechanism. You get this new maybe visual recognition system of missiles and real-time reactive sensors and all that stuff. And you're thinking, Deepak, okay, that sounds like a military application. But guess what? You could have a sensory application that now visually recognizes anything, including people. And we've already now got it in the form of DigiYatra, where when you're walking into an airport, you are not showing any QR code or anything. You stand in front of something, it looks at your face, matches you with whatever you uploaded in the past, and then you're in. I know this sounds like a privacy nightmare, but I love it. I mean, I'm happy for you to not take my information, which I have given you, and allow me to enter the airport without having to go this, oh, have you got this paper? Have you got that paper? Have you got? So maybe the defense will benefit from us having a DigiYatra, but whatever the defense does with it, DigiYatra will benefit from it even more eventually. So I think the problem really is that, when you do CapEx at the government level, your fear is that these guys will take them, like in Bangalore, they tell us they're building roads and there are no roads. So there are monuments like the Ijipura flyover, which now makes mention in, I think, US Congress bills saying we have to do something about this. It's going to soon be visible from outer space, and therefore our CapEx doesn't go into the right hands. But yes, hopefully, at least when I look at Bombay and some of the other places, it appears at least that there are some places where people actually build roads. So it's possible that CapEx can actually happen. And in a wartime, it would be unpatriotic to take that money and just put it in your pocket while not having anything to show for it. So I think you might be corrupt, but you want to be at least corrupt to a point where you're saying, at least I'll get the thing done, rather than, just like in Bangalore, nothing happens at all. So now, of course, I mean, here's a problem with the physical problem with this. Okay, I could spend 1,000 crores building something, and then incrementally it takes me 10 lakhs to do something, and then I earn 15 lakhs a year of a profit and of a revenue on it. So I spend 10 and make 15, I make a 5 lakh profit. Now you're thinking, if you spend 1,000 crores, what's the point of a 5 lakh profit, right? But if somebody took away that 1,000 crores from you and said, forget about it, we spent 1,000 crores, please go ahead and keep making this 10 and 15 lakhs, and maybe it will become 20 and 25 lakhs and 100 and 200 lakhs, so something like that. Then it makes sense for an economic actor to do just the incremental bits if somebody has taken the bulk of that part out of you. And I think I could be wrong here, but I keep thinking of this as the quick commerce is one of these ridiculous investments where you spend so much money building off all of these things, dark stores, this and that and all that. that eventually the incremental return is too little to justify the larger investment, right? But who knows? It could improve logistics in ways that we cannot imagine. Today they're transporting goods and groceries and shampoos. Tomorrow they'll do documents, and day after tomorrow they'll do people and something else. So the logistics networks change the way your commerce works. And if you have cheaper logistics, anybody anywhere can sell to you in a much easier way. So I mean, I think it's wasteful, yes, but is it wasteful really in the long term? I think there's very little capex that will eventually be wasteful completely.
If CapEx has such a high return and can change the country so dramatically, then why don't we manufacture in India anyway? From what I remember, we've tried in the past and it often hasn't gone very well. I remember this famously, cars were terrible, scooters were terrible. Even today, I think making TVs surely isn't that difficult, but we still get far better ones abroad and people are constantly trying to bring them in through customs because they're cheaper or better or something like that. So how do we actually make India manufacture? I mean, and if it was so good and we could have done it, wouldn't we have done it anyway?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point because while I think the answer comes down to the looking for the ROI before the I, and I think you've made this statement in the past, which is if you keep looking at how much am I going to make on this thing before I actually make it, that is when you kind of end up with this problem of saying, should I make it at all? Now, the defense changes this in a different way. For instance, if you want armored trucks and you want to go to M&M and make it, say, give me armored trucks, that's entirely made in India. M&M is going to be like, fantastic. But nobody's going to question why the army wants 20,000 armored trucks or 10,000. You're not going to say, oh, why can you not make do with 5,000? Like, dude, you determined you need 10,000, then you need 10,000. That's it. So the investment's coming in from there. M&M is getting this order and nobody's going to tell M&M, listen, you make 10,000 armored trucks and we'll decide how much you take from there. They will be like, no, you make 10,000 trucks and I'm going to take all of them because otherwise you won't make 10,000 trucks. And then then I'll need 5,000 more and then you'll be like, what? So because of that, M&M gets this massive order and starts making these trucks. And then it finds out that the tires need for minus 18 degrees centigrade is not being made in India and you have to import it from China. No, we want to make it in India. They go to Balkrishna Industries and say, can you make armored truck tires which can survive 18 degrees? They'll be like, oh, we'll have to figure this out. We'll have to buy some technology. We'll figure this out and we'll get this thing done. So you get downstream impacts. The second impact is downstream to the ancillaries, who also now get this extra order flow that's coming into place. But more importantly than all of this is number 3, which is all of these guys are doing CapEx. They're increasing their workforce. They're hiring people. They're buying equipment. They are effectively creating an employment universe that now spends in India. So where M&M makes the armored trucks, M&M probably also makes regular cars. And to buy those regular cars, they need people with the purchasing power to buy them in the first place, which you will not get if people are not employed. So if you had bought this armored truck from China or Italy or any other place, those people would have the workers who will make money and they will not come back to India and buy M&M cars. They are going to sit there and buy whatever their cars they want. So it's like you're creating the ecosystem that actually promotes the economy in the first place, right? Now this virtuous cycle of what the return on investment eventually returns in is something that you can't foresee in advance of all of this stuff. But think of this as M&M is not going to think like this. M&M is going to be like, you give me the order, you pay me. Now, when we have submarine orders, because these submarines can take 8-9 years and these 8-9 years span multiple governments, what the governments have started to do is just they pay for the whole submarine or at least half of it upfront, saying, listen, you're making a submarine, just continue to make it so that you don't have to be worried that tomorrow the government will change and you will no longer get the money for it, right? So this submarine company suddenly gets massive amounts of cash that it doesn't have to spend today because it's going to take it 4 years to spend whatever that money is. And in that process, it will be getting more and more money going forward. A large part of its income comes from other income, which is essentially interest on the money that it is storing as well. So, that's just an aside from this whole thing. The point about the ROI piece comes down to another important factor. It is inflation and interest rates. If my inflation is high, the guy on the ground, I remember we did a podcast on inflation really long back, and we talked about this. We said the problem is, if I have to invest in something, that thing has to have a return on investment at least as high as inflation, perhaps a little more. There's a reason for that, because if I don't even get inflation, what am I doing this? So it always astounds me when you get people who buy houses and put them out on rent, and the rental yields are 3%, and their interest cost is 8%. So I'm like, how are you even making interest on this? And most of America, Dubai, all of these places, usually rents equal the monthly payment on the house, which includes principal plus interest. So usually, but what I would say over here is India is in a different situation, but they do this for business, saying if the business doesn't return me as much as interest rates. Now our interest rates informally used to be as high as 24%. And therefore, you have to have a 24% return on investment every year in order for you to even think about making an investment, because otherwise you could just lend that money in the private markets and get 24% on it. Today, inflation's come down. Inflation come down quite substantially. And while it is around 3%, there is still another problem, that it's baked into the system that we have at least 10% inflation. Now, whenever I post these inflation charts once a month, and everybody comes back and says, you don't know the inflation on the street. So I'm like, okay, so what is the inflation on the street? No, my child's school bills have gone up by 10%, which is true. I think something will always go up by 10%. But my mobile phone bills haven't gone up meaningfully. The cost of a car from 1997 is not up meaningfully in general, and overall I get more features for it. The cost of a TV today is not meaningfully different from even 2004 or 2005. In 2004, I paid 1,16,000 rupees for a 48-inch TV. And today I am probably paying, and that was like, if I could hide behind it in case of a gunfight. It was that big. There is now 48-inch TVs available, 24,000 rupees. But for 1,16,000 rupees, I can get a pretty good 55-inch OLED kind of fantastic TV. So I'm saying that, okay, forget the fact that there's been deflation in these prices, but there's actually less inflation in most of this kind of stuff. The electronics part of things, the internet costs, the cost of fuel also, to the extent that it's been constant for the last 7 or 8 years. We've not noticed any inflation in that meaningfully. Even though crude prices have gone up, down, everywhere and sideways, there's been no inflation. So inflation has come down, but our feeling of that 10%. So when you go to your boss and ask for a hike, you're thinking 10% minimum, and 30% is like my expected. I mean, that's Bangalore for you. But 10% minimum is because you think your inflation is 10%. But I think inflation, as it seeps into the system, that inflation is actually falling. You will slowly get to a point where 6% becomes acceptable as an inflation. Now, if you don't have to, so for you, inflation is like an interest rate, right? So your costs increase by that much. So therefore, you need to increase your, output prices by that much, or your output yield by that much. But many times that doesn't happen. So what happens really is when people want to make investments in manufacturing, your investments have an entry cost of this inflation/interest rates, both of which make you feel that, listen, I don't think I can invest if I don't, if I don't make 10%. Whereas your neighboring country in China is doing the same investment at 4% because its inflation and its interest rates are at 4%. In India, again, while RBI has reduced rates, banks are cribbing and crying about how much they can reduce rates by. They want to keep a minimum of 4% net interest margin. So if they get at 6, they want to lend at 10. Whereas in other countries, NIMs are much lower, 2.5%. So if they borrow at 6, they can lend at 8.5. So in India, what happens is these things have to take time. Banks have to compress their NIMs and all that stuff. The second one is also that you have this cost of capital being high, traditionally leading into low CapEx simply because the cost justification is not there. And therefore, our investments have come into equity rather than debt. So which means a Swiggy is not invested in by Swiggy taking loans. It's done by foreign investors putting money into Swiggy. Now, why do foreign investors get the money to invest in Swiggy? Because foreign interest rates are very, very low. And when the foreign interest rates are low, they have to try and increase their yield somehow or the other. So they want to fund audacious big ideas. And those big ideas can be anywhere in the world. So it's a WeWork that says, I will change the industry of, offices. So there's a Regis that has offices all over the world. It's a listed company. It has nice little offices, but they're like, come here, sign a form. Whereas WeWork says, no, you can do face recognition and things like that. I will change the world. I'll give you free coffee and free hula hoops and beer and nice music and all that stuff. So make it fancy, and in that process, the founder goes in and makes himself a ton of money on his personal level. But who cares? This is all free money anyway. So that free money that kind of drives equity investments, that is what also brings in new CapEx. But this model has kind of been shied away from manufacturing meaningfully, because manufacturing has complications which other players probably don't. And for instance, if I wanted to just make an office space, that's fine, nobody cares. India has no problems in making IT services, making virtual products. But the minute you make physical products, you end up into this massive regulatory barrier as well. This is a major pain in the neck. I could have an office with 500 people working in it, answering phone calls in really cramped spaces with absolutely no regulatory pain at all. No, not at all. But if I have 10 people in a place and I don't have
manufacturing,
which is manufacturing, I'm manufacturing something. And in that process of manufacturing, I don't have an earthen pot made of clay which has water in it. And even though if I have a state-of-the-art, water processing system, RO and all that stuff, I will get a labor inspector who will come and say, give me 50,000 rupees, I will shut down your factory right now and you're finished. They can do this. Some of these laws are even criminal. You can go to jail for things like this. This sounds obscene, but this is what will prevent even your VCs from investing in the space, saying, excuse me, you have given the power for some random labor inspector to come, look at you and say, oh, you don't have this notice pasted exactly at 30 degrees offset to another notice, I am going to shut down your factory. That is regulatory pain, and the number of people that you can employ and what you can do with them and all that stuff. That creates this barrier that says, well, manufacturing, we'll do services.
On that, but we've had such a great run when it comes to services. The employment generation has been very significant. So the fact of the matter that comes to mind to me is, surely it's not just benevolence or a very generous government that is keeping these labor laws in check, right? I mean, we didn't create these just to be kind to a couple of thousand unions or whatever. So why do these then still persist when we've already seen such massive success in places which aren't as well regulated? I guess they have to be serving some purpose still, right? To protect people or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, there was possibly times when people did not serve water to their employees. So which is why somebody went in and made a rule that says all factories should have water. But then the problem was, they didn't just say you have to provide water. They said how you have to provide water, including the make of the material of the vessel in which that water is stored. This is extreme over-regulation, except we have not come down to a point where they want to remove it, because removing it takes a lot of effort and they need to have public consultation, and some clay guy will come and say, you are ruining my business by building in better building materials. But the idea is that these laws have become more specific and more real, and it's there in everything. I'm telling you, it's also there in financial services. It is there in other services as well. Many of these laws have retrograde impacts because it prevents industries from growing beyond a certain size. So for instance, there's a law that says, well, you can't grow more than if you have more than 100 people, then this law applies. If you have more than X amount of people, then this law applies. They were all created because workers were vote banks at one point. The famous mills in Bombay, which are now big, the Kamla Mills compound, and there's a fancy big building over there, and there's something else mills and Phoenix Mills and so on. So the idea of these mills was, there was mills in the center of the city. They were used to make textiles. It became more and more expensive to make those textiles in the city because of the costs of labor and so on. So they started to say, listen, let's relocate those mills outside of Bombay. But so many workers in Bombay were employed in those mills that they said, well, we're going to unionize, and India's half left-leaning anyways. And these unions became very powerful and became politically important. So once you have, oh, I have a union, I have union leaders. Who are these leaders? They end up having affiliations to political parties. The political parties could wield influence by saying, please tell your union workers to vote for us. They became politically important. So you wanted to create laws that gave unions power, that gave labor inspectors power, that gave, that shifted the power from the manufacturer to some regulatory entity that's on top of it, and then said, well, you know what, your business is your business. You can take the downside risk, but we are going to, somehow control the upside in different ways. These are absolutely weird because we are not built to, make manufacturing happen. And one of the problems with this is that we don't seem to see the same problem in IT services and financial services, where we've done really well. We've built software programmers who made things that like Swiggy and Zomato and Blinkit and all this stuff happen. We've built workforces that allow all of these things to happen. We've built UPI, which is instant payment through technology. So financial services is great. We are the back office of a lot of financial firms in the world. We allow all this to happen, but we somehow don't want to manufacture, because once you have all these rules, your costs go up. And then when we do this, we allow foreign companies to come in and dump their products at even lower than cost in different times, just because we don't manufacture the same thing. And we've only been able to protect a few industries. Like, for instance, we've been able to protect retail and auto. This is why we still have a retail and auto domestic industry. Retail, because multi-brand retail is not allowed to be used, to be invested in by foreign players, which is what Amazon's been fighting, because Amazon is technically not a multi-brand retail company. It's just a distinct marketplace where the actual seller is somebody else. So Amazon cannot own the inventory that it owns. And the big fight with Future Bazaar was Future Group, was that they wanted to get into multi-brand retail if India were to open up that market. But India has refused to traditionally. But you know what? Every Western country has as well. They've also tried to protect their domestic retail industries. So Walmart is an American company. Carrefour is a French company that operates in France. Tesco is a UK company. Aldi and a bunch of others are German companies. They've harnessed their own market. But if you go to Thailand, the local store that is most popular is a 7-Eleven, not a local Thai brand. So in that sense, there are some countries that have not protected their retail markets. There are some countries that have. India has very strongly. India protected auto. To a very large extent, we said we're going to put tariffs on external auto, because each of these countries goes and subsidizes their auto firms, whether it's Germany or whether it was America as well. America bailed out its auto companies twice or thrice, and now I think it's time number 3 that they're bailing them out. So if you're able to bail out your companies, that means your companies will become more efficient than my companies because they're getting government support. Then why should I not tariff you? I will tariff you to the point where, we don't need to support our companies. Of course, in our case, the government just goes and makes their own companies and makes them make cars. So that's a different aspect of it. But we traditionally made bad cars. We never allowed any foreign investment into them in the first place. Now we allow those foreign investments to happen. So Hyundai comes in, but it makes here. It doesn't just import cars from Korea. So does Toyota, so does Suzuki, which owns Maruti now. And but we have domestic players. We have a Tata, which has gone and bought Jaguar and Land Rover and so on. So we have a domestic auto industry of some magnitude. We have this thing, but those are the only manufacturing things we have. Even retail, I think what we have done is we basically said it makes sense if the people who make the shampoos make them in India. So that's why HUL manufactures here, even though it's owned by Unilever, or Nestle manufactures here, even though it's owned by the Swiss company. So I think we've ended up with a system that has favored some of these large entities, and the small entities who don't matter, which is less than 100 people. But anyone who wants to become big has had to face a lot of regulatory pain. And maybe the big players like it that way, because they're like, okay, why should I allow small competition to come and break us up? But given the point of view of where it is right now, and I can tell you this because I have become more aware of it recently is that we have now more brands of shampoo than we probably ever did, more brands of clothing, more brands of FMCG goods, simply because the smaller guys are able to now sell through a Cred, a Blinkit, a Zomato, whatever. There are 7 different places. They don't need a distribution network anymore. They just need to plug into these logistics networks, which are now created by tech-enabled company services and being able to manufacture the product. But it's in the early stage. We're almost like saying, we can deliver it to you in 10 minutes if you make it in some other country.
I'd like to now bring this back to the stock market, which is what anyone listening to this pays attention to. I have a fear that if you then invest in, say, manufacturing or defense companies now, it might be a bit like investing in, say, Peloton or Zoom just when COVID was waning or was at its peak. Something that looks like it's going to extrapolate and keep growing, but actually it's in for a very severe correction because that trend has actually peaked. And by the time you've got around to it, that moment is over. And at some level, you look at maybe many of these conflicts we're talking about, they may wane and fizzle out or be resolved amicably or to whatever extent they can. So how do you think about that? Do you think that looking at, say, manufacturing or defense or themes like this in India right now, is this post-fact too late, or is this something that still has room to play out?
So, if COVID had lasted and we kept getting these COVID waves every 2 years, Zoom and Peloton would still be zooming and Pelotoning, if you may. But the problem that happened at that time was it was a triggered small event. And that possibly is not going to recur because I don't think we're going to allow people to lock us into our homes based on a narrative that is somehow not tested meaningfully in real life. So, but I don't think I can say the same thing about India in a warlike situation or the world also. As in, India has had these efforts that have tried to break us and put us into war for decades. We've had issues from 1965, in 1971, in the 90s, in 1999 there was a Kargil war. There, 2008 there was a big terrorist attack in Bombay, and that was horrible. And I thought we will go to war at that time, but we didn't for whatever reason. But now the belligerence is back in the sense of saying, listen, we're not going to take this anymore. So I expect more wars simply because I think that is the default nature of the geopolitical situation we are in. Is we have a failed state next door whose only way of moving ahead is to have a war. But so does perhaps Israel as well. Israel's largest export is defense material and weapons. Ukraine also will probably come out shining of whatever they've learned from all this drone stuff that they've been doing. They probably become a defense exporter as well. So there is this thing that wars will always exist because some people benefit from them. Now, we might want peace, but if you have somebody attacking you, you're going to go to war. So I think war will continue as a theme. What has changed really is our response to it. 2 ways. We've decided to become more belligerent about it. And I think it's more and more obvious that the government has decided, at least post-Ukraine, what happened was Russia's reserves were frozen by America. So Russia can no longer spend the dollars that it owns, even though it earned them over the years. So if somebody can steal your currency, and America did that and so did Europe. I'm not saying this from a bad perspective. I think they did what was right for their country, but it effectively impinged on what Russia could do. It could happen to India as well. And India is like, listen, if you can do that to us, you can stop the flow of weapons to us, which we are buying. India is the second largest arms importer in the world. We're like, why are we the second largest arms importer? Why can't we make our own arms? If it's a gun, it's mechanical, there is something in there, or it's got electronics, there's something in there, we can do it. Why don't we do it? I don't know, labor laws, all this stuff. Well, that's a problem, yes, but if we have a will, we will do it. So I think that was one thing that is promoting this and then saying, well, is this a secular trend? This is going to happen for the next 10 years. I think so, because I think if the thought process has changed and wars continue to happen, they're just going to drive more and more of these different things. The problem in buying defense stocks is your assumption that the winner is going to be one of these guys. It may not be. Palantir, for instance, is a new company that somehow benefited from the war games all over the place, and you would not have been able to bet on it if you were betting on it 10 years, 15 years ago, because it wasn't listed. And then you would be like, oh, who's this new guy who's come and eaten my lunch? So you'd have to invest in it as soon as it came as well. But the other thing is, you have this dependence that is weird. So, for instance, HAL says it has to deliver planes to the Air Force. The Air Force says, why aren't you giving me my planes? HAL says, well, you know what, I need these engines. We don't make engines. Well, who makes the engines? It's GE. Why isn't GE giving you the engines? I don't know. And is that because America is telling it not to give you the engines? Or maybe GE is saying, listen, I have orders for so many engines, I just don't have time to make yours. But whatever it is, we're not getting engines for our Air Force. So somebody's got to ask HAL the question, why don't you make engines? These are engines. You guys have been testing this stuff for the longest time. I'm sure you have some thought process around that. So if that is the thought process, then the idea would be HAL needs to make engines. And whoever is making engines, whether it is you or a small company that is also making it, and people who have made naval engines can probably go further into it. We have the engineering talent, but to go down that route is one thing. But this opportunity that comes sometimes is so disproportionate, and it's not necessarily bad. I'll give you an example of a broad market. Like 1999 was the last war. As I said, 2008 there was no war. 1999 or 8, I think 8 or 9 was when Kargil was. There was April 1999, I think. Then the index was at 979. That's the point at which it started. And May 15th or 16th is when the war got over. Within 6 months, the market was at 1480, a 50% rise in 6 months. You might say this is not because of the war, because Y2K and all the other stuff and all that stuff. I think part of it was also the fact that they were starting to learn that we should be making more of these weapons. In fact, that was a time when I think there was this, because Kargil was a war fought with India in the foothills and the Pakistani soldiers occupying the heights. So we had to use these howitzers or these guns, these Bofors wala guns, to be able to shoot out from the bottom there. But while you had the guns, the bullets were also required. So they had to contract a bunch of Indian companies to make the bullets, which is when they started to learn how to make bullets in the first place. They're not bullets or whatever, this ammunition, which is fairly large. But whatever it was, they made it. And then they learned that they could do it, so they're now making a lot more of it, that ordnances and bunch of things like that. Now you end up with a situation where, that company or the set of companies that were making this are listed in the stock market. Nobody ever thought that they would make, bullets for howitzer level guns. But now you're getting these, this new order that comes all over the place. Maybe that's why those stocks did well at that time, and maybe the order did fizzle out because afterwards the conflict is over and you're done. But there was that economic boom at that time. The problem really is that it's not just defense stocks that I think we should look at, because once India says, well, I'm going to do a lot more defense stuff, it's everything downstream. If you're getting cash to make drones, the same drone tech can be used to build drones that logistics that do logistics. It could be there are these farmland drones, what do they call that thing? Pesticides. They could put pesticides on plants by just doing this. Once you get a better hang of this technology and better hang of people to use it, the people who build or use drones can actually be used to do a number of things which are otherwise done by machines which are impeded by land-based networks. Messaging, document sending, and physical document sending and back and all that stuff. All this can be done by drones eventually. What I'm saying is the opportunity is there. Now, if this opportunity is small, it's meaningless. And I say this because you could tell me that, Deepak, they'll make bullets. And I'll say, yeah, fine, we'll make bullets for let's say a year. And then we'll have way too many bullets and not enough usage of those bullets. And then they'll stop making bullets. So I get a big order for 2 years and then I don't get any order. What's the point of me building capacity to make bullets if you don't keep ordering from me, right? But no, I'm saying that they will order a lot more than bullets. You'll have to make all of that stuff. It will be radars, visual equipment, this, that, all sorts of stuff. So when I have all this stuff, what does it mean for a stock market player really? It's about looking at that space and saying, well, you know what, these guys have the capacity to make 10 things. But tomorrow what's coming is 1,000 things. The defense budget is the second largest item in our government's expenditure. The largest is interest payments. The second largest is defense. So if you're looking at 1.5 lakh crores of defense spending, with where India's GDP is going, it's probably going to go, and I'm saying this at even say 2% or 3% or 2% of GDP, we're looking at about 8 lakh crores of spending in defense itself. Part of it will go to pensions and services and this thing and that, but a good part of it will come into CapEx as well. So if you're 1 lakh or 1,50,000 crores of defense CapEx spending is happening this year, it will probably become 3 lakh crores in the next few years and little more. Each of these 3 lakh crores has a multiplier effect. So if you spend 3 lakh crores on giving one order, that guy goes downstream and gives another set of orders. So it results in a 3x multiplier. So you're talking about 9 to 10 lakh crores that possibly come into the economy in just terms of spending per year, effective value creation per year. If that effective value creation of 10 lakh crores per year translates into GDP, that's about 2.5% of GDP, that is going to get added on because of incremental spending that will, maybe 2% of GDP, will get added on because of this defense spending. That's quite huge. So if you take 2% that's coming from one trigger alone, and your whole country's growth is about 6.5, that's 1/3 of your growth that's coming in from this one thing alone, the stock market will probably recognize this and say, maybe India doesn't grow at 6, maybe it grows at 8. If India grows at 8, our multipliers increase, our profitability and the size and scale of things improve, and pretty much everybody else makes money. So I think it's more like me saying, listen, think of it short term, but think of it long term as well. Think of it 10 years from now, you're going to be a much bigger economy because of this. That's what my early thought is.
Are you more bullish on India, therefore, because of all this? Or are you now perhaps more interested or forgiving of VC, which you've been critical of in the past, because often they take bets that no one else will?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, because I think one of the things that makes me very bullish about India is this move from being a trader to a manufacturer. Because I think if we make for India, the scale of the opportunity is absolutely massive. We are in the early stages of all of this stuff, and I think because we import really 90 to 95% of everything that we kind of use, we should be manufacturing lesser and lesser. We should be importing lesser and lesser and manufacturing more and more here. That won't happen unless we try to build an ecosystem. Until now, it has always been like this whole regulatory nightmare around this stuff. But now that this defense piece is adding a layer that we have to manufacture domestically, at least for defense, that will trickle down into we have to manufacture for ourselves because we already have the capacity right here. I think that is the core of this, the concept or the change over here. On the VC part, it's interesting. I think they do a fantastic job. I've thanked them many times for giving me stuff that would otherwise be economically a waste of effort. So for instance, I have like maybe 400 cloth bags which are delivered to me. Before they turned into paper bags, they would make these cloth bags, nice cloth bags. I got it from Ola Food and Uber Foods and Uber Eats or whatever it was called. And because they made these things because they wanted to deliver food in a package that was not plastic. So they made these cloth bags. And I'm like, nobody makes cloth bags because it's expensive. They realized it later that we should do paper bags instead. But since they wanted cloth bags and some VC was giving them a lot of money, they gave me cloth bags. So I have a lot of cloth bags. I can use it in different ways. So the problem with this whole equation is that it's economically unviable to do something that is nice for me as a customer, but I got it anyway. And I thank them for that. But I also think that in the process, they probably introduced the mechanism of making cloth bags in a more interesting way. So now we do have different layers of jute/cloth bags that are being made in India. So it's great for you to have VC as a customer. It's also great for having VC as an entrepreneur, because you are allowed to try ideas which are so outlandish that would not be allowed to try with anybody with the more. So for instance, if you went to a bank loan, the bank would look at you and say, excuse me, why are you doing cloth bags?
Get out of here.
Please, put sellotape and give it to them, So that would be the kind of response you would get from somebody who's more conservative in valuation. Now, I think it's life-changing to me to have 15-minute delivery. It's life-changing because I know it is unprofitable, even by knowing the books, for somebody to do so. That somebody is continuing to do so, where I can be heating my frying pan, realize I don't have eggs, and before the frying pan is hot enough to make my omelette in, the eggs are here. This is ridiculous, but somebody is doing this for me. Thank you very much. I love it. I know it's economically infeasible. It's changed but I think it's changed my behavior as well. I don't store as many eggs as I used to earlier, simply because I know it's available in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. You change this because I will change my behavior as well. It means I don't have to spend as much in one shot. So I spend a lot of piecemeal. I might spend more at the end of it, doesn't matter. But in the end, it changes the way I think, because I'm like, if it's late at night and I need something, I'm like, oh shit, this isn't there. All the stores are closed. What do I do now? I just order from this place. So it just changes mentality like that. And I would say I'm bullish on it because I think once you change behavior, you can get more things out of this change behavior than you can from whatever you were selling in the first place. So I'm bullish about VC funded ecosystems, not necessarily about the individual players, because there tends to be other issues that kind of complicates this.
This sounds extremely bullish, but I think there's this saying that India always disappoints both the optimists and the pessimists. So do you see any foreseeable risks to this newfound motivation and momentum going away very quickly?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's the biggest risk of us, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, which we have done many times, though thankfully not so much in cricket anymore, but as much possible in, just as I know it's very specific, but RCB is doing actually quite well. It is not done. So, but having said that, I think one of the biggest risks comes from a force which I think is extreme recently. And some of the things involve our constitutional bodies not acting exactly the way they should be. And maybe I'm specifically pointing about the court processes hurting our progress. We already know that we have backlogs and backlogs and backlogs of court. So if you fight a case, it can take you 10 years. A bankruptcy court doesn't move things around in 1 month or 2 months, it moves things around in 2 or 3 years, which was still okay. We thought better than the 15 years it used to take earlier. But the Supreme Court has just gone and added another stymie into the mix. 5 years after a bankruptcy resolution was done, and a company called Bhushan Steel and Power was sold to this company called JSW Steel because of various objections of an enforcement directorate and the past promoters. And the past promoters who were therefore also dinged by the ED for a bunch of other wrongdoings. The Supreme Court has decided that they want to undo that entire resolution 5 years ago and liquidate that company. No, the JSW has taken this over, they have changed the company, they have used it, they've spent more money in modernizing it, modifying it, and it's been 4 years or so since. They have given very flimsy, in my view, my personal view, reasons to do this. They're saying, oh, you delayed the acquisition by a few months, or that you said you will do this at this time and you paid using a loan rather than paying from your own money. These things are not meaningful enough to shut down liquidation, to convert a resolution into a liquidation. It means you have to now break the company piecemeal and sell it to people, saying, oh, the land is worth so much, the equipment is worth so much. Why would you do that to a running company that's profitable now? Somebody else has actually worked to make it profitable. Why didn't you just charge a fine that says, well, you know what, you did this wrong, so I'm going to charge you a certain fine. But no, you've decided that in the interests of justice, in your view, you will destroy an entire economic process and introduce a fear into other people's minds that says, well, I don't want to go through this. If I bought a company in bankruptcy, the standard point is nobody else gets to tell me anything for what it had done before the bankruptcy, because that's I bought it out of bankruptcy. Anything before bankruptcy is gone. It's written off. This somehow the Supreme Court has said is not the case. So they've changed the definition of what is worldwide accepted as a conceptual process that allows capitalism to succeed, because in the death of one is the birth of another, and you have to let the one die before the new one gets born, right? If you don't let it die, then it's like saying somebody at some point in time owed a bank 100 rupees. He will owe that forever for his rest of his life, regardless of what he does. Even though he does a settlement with the bank has agreed to take a hit and take only 10 rupees for that 100. The Supreme Court decided, no, you actually owed 100. I don't care if the bank has settled with you. So this is the kind of thing that can kind of ruin this entire process and slow down our growth towards something greater. Because it's not always the government that funds the CapEx. It's also got to be the bond market. We need better bankruptcy resolution standards and better court processes, I think, in my view, to help our economy propel forward. I hope they reverse this decision. I hope they change it to a point which sounds economically viable. Because at some point, it scares me that somebody could go and change something that was done 5 years ago.
Fair. I'll just come to my last 1 or 2 questions. The first one is, if you had incremental capital to deploy today, do you think you would be just will thematic funds finally feature in your portfolio, even though you generally hate them? And would you actually buy a bunch of defense or manufacturing ones? Or what do you think you would do with a little bit more money coming in this year?
Sometimes the defense themes and all that stuff start making sense when the beginning parts of a euphoria about a theme. It's like saying, well, you know what, when Amazon came in, Amazon was they were selling books online, so therefore we should buy Amazon. So Amazon went crazily up at that time, 1999 is talking about. And in 2000 it fell 90%, because the fear was that we've overvalued this company, it's a waste of time, it's losing money and so on. But in that 90% down onwards, they kept going up and they never had to raise any capital. They never had to raise any more cash because they were cash flow positive right from a little
that
bit
one
before
moment
that.
where they raised $1 million for 20% of the company. This anecdote I keep hearing. Yes.
And then they've never had to raise money since. So they've kind of kept on being cash flow positive, but economically they were showing gap negative returns. So people were writing them off, but this company kept growing and going and going and going. So the trend was right that electronically people will buy things on the internet and all that stuff. The beneficiary was right, it was still Amazon, except you overvalued it and made it a theme. So maybe these thematic funds and all, when they come, they will create too much of a flutter in the industry. There will be more people willing to list, more companies will come and say, we do defense stuff. And that's what's going to actually possibly change the contours of whether I make money in the short term or not. But if you look at this as a long-term phenomenon, the good companies, I think, will benefit massively in the long term. So even if you bought if you had bought Amazon at that point before it fell 90% to now, you would still make out quite well, because Amazon did make a significantly greater economic profit than anything that was envisioned even at that time. I think that's the scale of what will happen with the companies today. Though, as I have said, the beneficiary is not just defense. It's companies that are possibly downstream from defense as well. So you might see that the winners that you want are not just defense. They are defense, domestic consumption, other manufacturing companies, tire makers it could be, and so on. So it's actually a series of things that will work. I would say the theme has become active and has been active for the last 2 years. I think we've been talking about this. Surge India as a portfolio in our PMS has been investing in these companies, and sometimes made ridiculous amounts of profit. But the theme continues. So I don't think there is a major barrier to this theme unless we get some, I don't know, the world says, well, India is not allowed to make its own weapons or something like that. But the other than that, I would say theme continues.
And I think my last question, two people who I think you've been echoing or actually advocating on this podcast are Donald Trump, because you've been talking about how you need to build things locally, and which seems to be the thing that he's most interested in. And more interesting, Narayan Murthy, who keeps saying we should be working these many hours and making India into an economic superpower. Are you accidentally in agreement with both of them?
I think, interestingly, I'm a issue-based okay guy. So I'm like, I will not say I disagree with Trump because he's Trump, because in certain issues I am completely with him, in certain issues I am not with him. And the same thing with Narayan Murthy, but so different levels of things. So for instance, I don't think there is any reason for us to say that a 70-hour work a week should be what other people work. But if you give me the incentive by saying I can be an entrepreneur, run my business, I will work 160 hours a week if I can. I don't know how many hours are there.
I think it's 168, so you probably can't pull that off.
I
But your
can't
point
pull
is
it off.
taken. Yeah.
But I would work as much as I can simply because I stand to reap enormous economic benefits out of this. And you go to a shopkeeper who runs a shop. The guy is going to be working about 100 plus hours a week anyway. He's not going to look at you and say, well, Narayan Murthy said it. That's why I'm working 70, 100 hours a week. He's like, this is how my business will run. If I work 70, 100 hours a week, I will do it. Yes, you're sitting in an AC place and you're working in a certain shop, and or if you're working in that shop owned by the entrepreneur, you've been hired to work 10 hours, you will work 10 hours, or you've been hired to work 8 hours, you'll work 8 hours a day. That's fine. But I think working 70 hours in a business where you stand to make a lot of money, all of us will do it simply because we're offered that kind of economic opportunity. Trump, I find that very interesting because one of the things that people said recently was about him telling Apple that you shouldn't build in India. You should build for India in India, but for America, please build in America. What's wrong with that? I think that's exactly what we are saying. We're telling our companies, at least build for India in India. Don't buy LED lights from China, rebrand them with your name and sell it in India. If you make the LEDs in India, then more great things will happen. Not only because you make the LEDs, but because you buy that LED making equipment. Why is 99% of textile machines that make textile, that are used in the sewing machines? India is the second largest or third largest textile exporter in the world. And yet we don't make our own textile sewing machines. Really, China makes all of them. How come China makes 99% and Italy makes 1% of the machines we use? Whereas we have an engineering ecosystem that could make a machine, but we don't. I find that very surprising. So we should be promoting the making of these machines. We should make machines that make parts for other machines. The idea of this is that if you don't do that, then you will always have an entire industry dependent on some Chinese person or some external person being responsible for all of this. And this applies to even our chips, our laptops, our operating systems. Somebody needs to go down this route of saying, and maybe the war and this defense thing provides us the capability of saying, listen, if you have to build our own operating system that is completely free from all external influences, it's going to come from perhaps a breakout of an open source operating system, but it's going to have to come from a budget that's funded by defense. And the defense can do it because they can always justify this budget by saying, it's a war, we have to be on our own. And maybe the operating system example is to, because we already have potentially open source systems that help you do things. But I think there's more than that. It's across the manufacturing base. It has never been easier to manufacture than today because you have all these open AI tools and ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini that gives you a bunch of different ways that you can manufacture the same thing, including process diagrams and PCB layouts and all of that stuff. But I think if the war is the push that you need to get this to happen, this is going to be what makes it happen for India. I don't think Trump is going to like what I said because I'm saying it for India, but he's saying exactly what I'm saying, except he's saying for the US.
Well, let's hope that inadvertently this conflict is the start of a very bullish decade or many decades to come for India.
Thanks, Shrey. It was fun.
Thanks.
Mutual funds are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.